Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we have an exciting show today. Imagine this: should recreational marijuana be legalized in the state of Pennsylvania? And here's one for you. The Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association urges the passage, I hope you're seated, of strangulation law to better protect victims. But first, as always, the big stories of the week: Down syndrome and abortion. We're going to get to that and more following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we got a action-packed show today, 30 minutes of nothing but big issues. Let me start with the big stories of the week with a couple of the state's leading journalists. Sitting across from me is Katie Meyer. She's the Capitol Bureau Chief with WITF. John Micek, he's the Editor-in-Chief of Pennsylvania Capital Star. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Got it right. All right, Katie, let me start with you. Both you and John have written about the whole business of abortion and Down syndrome. The House of Representatives, with some Democratic votes, passed a bill that would have made, how can I say, stiff penalties for doctors if they were to perform abortion solely on the basis that a fetus has been how do I put this? Diagnosed with Down syndrome. Take it.
Sure. So, the House passed this. There were some votes on either side. And honestly, votes like this, it is specifically targeted at fetuses with Down syndrome and the doctors that perform those abortions. But it broke down like any abortion debate does in the legislature. And we've seen many of those. We see them at least once a year, sometimes twice. So, mostly Republicans, but some Democrats say that abortion is immoral. And that was really the argument for this particular bill. People on the other side say it's an essential right for women. And this is a loggerhead that we've been seeing for decades. I mean, the abortion debate in Pennsylvania has been this way for a long time. It's getting more partisan over the years. I've talked to some journalists who have been covering this stuff for decades, and they say it's getting a little bit more partisan, but fundamentally, the arguments remain
How many
the same.
different ways can you say Planned Parenthood versus Casey?
Well, exactly,
The former governor. And yeah, right. Go ahead, John.
No, I mean, so the bill passed on a 117-76 vote with some Democratic crossovers voting in favor, which is not unexpected. You have some Southwestern Democrats like Pam Snyder who are still opposed to abortion rights. It seems unlikely that the Senate is going to take it up because they have a couple of Southeastern members who are on the bubble in 2020. In any event, it faces a guaranteed gubernatorial veto, so they would just be wasting effort on that side of the building in any event. But, I think, Terry, one of the things that was striking about this debate on Tuesday afternoon, and it stretched better than 2 hours on the House floor, was the real emergence of the new class of Democratic women who got elected last cycle. We saw representatives like Sarah Innamorato, Elizabeth Fiedler stepping up to the microphone, Liz Hanbidge from Montgomery County, all speaking out quite forcefully on this. And I think, it was funny the degree, and maybe Katie can back me up on this, the degree to which sort of male lawmakers receded from the debate. I think, and you had Republican women like Tara Tuhill and Sue Helm step up as well, realizing that this is an issue really that is not the province of male lawmakers, and it was striking for the tone and for the tenor of it in that regard.
So they backed off. I think men backed off.
A little bit. I mean, I will say women tended to dominate this debate, but women are on both sides of the issue as well. So it's not like women are all for abortion rights. Right. I will say one of the more forceful points on this did come from a man. It was from Dan Frankel, Allegheny County lawmaker, who went, and I hadn't seen this done before, he went to the Legislative Reference Bureau, which drafts bills, for sort of a second expert opinion. The Legislative Reference Bureau is a totally nonpartisan body, and when I tell you they're nonpartisan, they're very careful. They're all lawyers. But the LBR said that they think the bill is unconstitutional because in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which is the relevant case law on the Supreme Court level for this right now, you can't pose an undue burden on
is the operative phrase.
Before viability. And this bill doesn't have any difference between viability and not.
Before I go to John on an important question about presidential politics in Pennsylvania, I'm going to follow up with one question. This passed the House last session, if my memory serves me. So this isn't motivated in a sense by the big debate on abortion that's going on with the Alabama law. This literally has been something that's hung around for some time.
This has hung around for some time, but I will say, Terry, this is a debate that gets strung right into the larger abortion debate. So even though this is on Down syndrome, I would just call it an abortion bill, because the debate is the exact same in any other abortion bill.
We're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to take up presidential politics. Joe Biden here on Saturday, the president coming on Monday. There seems like presidential candidates are all over the place. And then we have something called the May 21 primary. Is anyone going to vote? We'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, let's turn our attention to something called presidential politics. I'll tell you, John, Pennsylvania is center stage. Our primary next year is not until April. There's, 12 weeks or something where they'll be selecting delegates, not in our state until April, but yet the general election, we're going to be one of the top states, correct? And their candidates are all over our state.
Yeah, I think we're up to like 9,000 Democratic primary candidates now. Bill de Blasio, the New York mayor, jumped in on Thursday morning with a splashy campaign video. Look, Terry, Pennsylvania remains critical. You can't win the White House without winning Pennsylvania. Donald Trump carried the state by 44,000 votes, less than that percentage point in 2016. We're already seeing Democrats coming into the state. We had Elizabeth Warren in just past week, Joe Biden rallying in Philly on Saturday. That came on top of his appearance in Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago. It's going to be fast and furious. Donald Trump at his rallies has continuously bragged about picking off Pennsylvania after 3 decades of it being carried by Democrats in presidential years. He has staff on the ground in the state now who want to keep it in the White House's column. Conversely, Democrats are making a big push, and here we find ourselves.
Yeah. So to pick up on that, it's not just that we're in the center of the politics, but the fact of the matter is that we're going to continue to be center stage. I don't think it's likely to fall off in any appreciable way.
No, I mean, you see Joe Biden putting his campaign headquarters in Philly. You see, Terry, you know this as well as I do. I mean, Pennsylvania is an essential state to win if you want to win the White House. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and we'll see. I mean, they're already staffing up, as John points out. I mean, and we got this election is a year and a half away, and I know. But look, it's a full employment bill for you journalists, so it gives you a lot to write about.
I keep reminding myself that it's 10 months until Iowa and New Hampshire, and God knows how many Democrats could be in the race by then.
All right, May 21, we have, believe it or not, the primary elections for I'll say hundreds of offices in the state. I don't remember a time when there seems to be less interest in these, Katie. What are you doing on ITF and PA Public Radio?
We always keep an eye on a lot of these candidates. We're looking at Senate special elections right now. That's been a big one. Yeah. The judicial elections are important. I think for anybody who wants to be informed, everyone should be informed. The Bar Association does preferred and non-preferred candidates, and that's usually a very good indicator of who is a good person to vote for.
Yeah, but then we have elections for offices like, remember, when you get to vote, Prothonotary Clerk of Courts, wow, Recorder of Deeds. Does anybody have any chance of knowing these are
it's
not that they're not good people.
No, I'm sure they're lovely people. These are honestly offices that should be appointed rather than elected for that very reason. But I mean, Terry, keep in mind, we have something like 2,500 different municipalities in Pennsylvania, something like 1,500 different special taxing districts. And 500 school boards. I mean, so
we have a lot of local government.
Yeah, I mean,
these.
The funny thing is that these REISs are low interest and low wattage, but there's a credible argument to be made that there are no contests that are more important than township commissioners or borough councils or school boards, because they affect the people the most directly. And these are your neighbors who are running for this stuff.
You're exactly right. All right, we don't have a lot of time left, but I have to get to Tom Wolf and Restore Pennsylvania. It's a big deal. 4.5 million? Is that what? Billion. Yeah, I get it right.
Yeah.
4.5 billion.
But it's all theoretical at this point. This is Wolf's big infrastructure plan. He wants to fund it on a severance tax on natural gas drillers, which we don't have in Pennsylvania, though we do have an impact fee. Republicans, Wolf has tried this sort of tax every single year since he's been governor.
It's another way to get the severance tax?
Well, it's a new strategy for him, and I have heard lawmakers say, oh, that was smart of him because he took it out of the budget process. The severance tax isn't part of the budget now. It's specifically going to, if it passes, which who knows, it would fund infrastructure projects. So things like broadband expansion, things like flood remediation, road and bridge repairs. And those are things that Pennsylvania, a lot of municipalities desperately need. And you did see, he had an event the other day, and he got municipal leaders from both sides of the aisle up there on
One thing that's funny about this is Republicans were all in for Tom Corbett's transportation plan, $2.3 billion about 5 years ago, funded on the back of the highest gas tax in the nation. They don't like this gas tax and this infrastructure plan.
All right, well, look, thanks for coming in. We'll obviously follow through on a couple of these subjects. All right, coming up, should recreational marijuana be legalized in the state? And the one that I really want to know about, the passage of a strangulation law. I mean, I've never even heard of that. Perhaps you have. We'll get to that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
All right, for the next couple of segments, we have some really important subjects to deal with. One is the legalization of recreational marijuana, and then something that I didn't even know exists, the passage of a strangulation law to better protect victims. Joining me to discuss those subjects is David Arnold, Jr. He's a Lebanon County District Attorney, and Kate Appleman. She's the Senior Clinical Director of Men's Services at the Caron Treatment Centers, which is located in Berks County. Do I got that right?
That's correct.
Berks County. All right, I'm going to stay with you, Kate. All right, let's start with this. 59% of Pennsylvanians support the legalization of recreational marijuana in most polls, including the Franklin and Marshall College poll. Number two, 10 states have already legalized recreational marijuana. You have, as a treatment specialist, you have some concerns about that, correct?
Correct.
Help us out. What are they?
Let's talk about them.
Yes.
So I've had the opportunity to work in the treatment sector for about 16 years. And when we look at some of the elements that are occurring in conjunction with marijuana, that's where a lot of the concerns really do come from. So one of the things that we talk about so frequently is the importance of really looking into research and statistics to make informed decisions around legalizing marijuana. So there's a couple of elements that I think are really important to highlight. One of the things that I think about frequently is the fact that out in the media there's so much noise and volume around marijuana today. And when we look at two different elements, one, what research is really showing us, and two, what we're seeing with patient care.
And you see patients who have addictions or other problems. Go ahead.
We do. And with our adolescents, marijuana is actually the primary drug of choice that they identify in walking through the doors in our treatment. And in addition to that, if we look at all of our patients overall, from adolescents all the way through older adults, about 50% of our patients identify marijuana as one of their primary or secondary drugs of choice. So people are using it. And when we look at some of the research, there is a epidemiologic study that was done in 2005 that identified that all psychiatric maladies, depression, anxiety, social phobia, agoraphobia, are all exacerbated by marijuana use. So we've known this for the past 15 years. And sitting here today versus 15 years ago, we acknowledge that the potency of marijuana has increased exponentially at that point, from then until now. So I think all of those are realities.
Real factors.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to you, but I want to start to you, Mr. District Attorney. Let's go to this. Driving under the, impaired, I'll put it that way, you get some potential legal problems that occur when people are, I'll put it this way, on recreational marijuana. Take it.
Well, and it's a problem, and we have the ability as Pennsylvania to look at what's happened in other states who have legalized recreational marijuana, and the reality is their fatal drug driving crashes have skyrocketed. The reality is adolescent use of marijuana is increasing in those states faster than it is anywhere else. There's been an increase in both violent crime and property crime in Colorado since they've legalized marijuana. Again, I can't say that there's a correlation there, but the reality is these things are happening, and before we just rush through the process of let's legalize this, we need to look at the problems that are occurring in other states, and because we can't ignore it. And then when you factor in the science behind the use of marijuana, as Kate mentioned, these are things that people that are trying to push this legislation through are just simply ignoring, and it's too dangerous to ignore all these different signs.
Yeah, before we end the segment, I'm going to go back to Kate. Let's these health problems, ultimately, how serious are they? These side effects that you've been describing.
We look at them as being extremely serious. When we're talking about active symptoms of depression, anxiety, increased suicidal ideation, we're talking about people's lives here. And then we can also really look at the fact that it's not just with adolescents, but also with adults.
Right.
When you look at brain development for adolescents, even up through the age of 25, we're looking at an entire population of people that their ability to really start to understand adulthood and how to be productive members of society is a part of the main goal for them. And when you start introducing significantly potent mood and mind altering substances in that realm, we're going to be looking at some pretty significant issues. And the other reality is, when we talk about leaning into the science, there was a study that was done in New Zealand just a couple of months ago that the IQ is actually dropping as a result by 6 points as a result of marijuana use. We look at JAMA studies as recent as the beginning of this year that looks at that direct correlation between marijuana use and depression. So when you ask about how important is it really, from a psychological standpoint and a mental health standpoint, it's extremely important.
Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on. I'm going to keep David on so we can talk about a couple of legal issues, but good update. Your point of view is important and it needs to be considered. All right, when we come back, I want to talk about the passage of a strangulation law. It's something, in all my years, I've never heard anything like this, and we'll get to the district attorney about that after we talk about money, after we pay some bills.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, well, I'm chatting with David Arnold. He's the Lebanon County District Attorney, and I'll tell you something, the District Attorneys Association, I think I got this right, put out was PA District Attorneys Association urges the passage of strangulation law to better protect victims. You got to explain this. Obviously, it's a violent crime. Go ahead, take it.
It is a violent crime, and you know, just a little bit of the history of how this came about. Strangulation never was its own freestanding crime, if you will. Would always, if somebody had been accused of strangling another individual, they'd be charged with maybe simple assault. Well, the reality of strangulation is it's a very dangerous crime. It's a very violent crime. It can result in unconsciousness within seconds. It can result in death, as anybody can understand. And it deserved to be treated more strongly and more severely than simply as a simple assault. Part of the problem that you have in a strangulation case is oftentimes there are no physical signs of injury. You know, you don't see cuts or broken bones or bruises like you might otherwise see in other violent crimes. So it was often very difficult to prosecute a case, and when you did, it was always as a low-level misdemeanor offense, despite the fact that it was such a violent crime that was taking place. So in 2016, it became its own crime. The crime of strangulation got on the books in Pennsylvania, and the new bill we're hoping will pass soon through the legislature essentially kind of enhances the penalties for strangulation. It would allow for an increase in sentencing if there's a prior conviction for strangulation. It would allow for a sentencing enhancement for if you've got a prior strangulation conviction for other crimes such as stalking. So it really is to make sure that stalking is treated with the severity that it actually is.
Yeah. Wow, I mean, this is just something that I don't think, I mean, I've never even thought about this. So when you talk about strangulation, are you just talking about someone who's actually killed, it's homicide, or are you talking about someone who just suffers pretty severe, a severe injury and then may go and file, you know, go to the law enforcement folks and say, look, you know, go ahead.
Well, and it could be homicide, it could be severe injury, it could be, as I said, oftentimes you could strangle somebody, they could go to unconsciousness and it will not leave a mark. So it's very difficult oftentimes to prove strangulation. And we see it far too often in domestic violence cases. It gets reported to police regularly. It's still difficult to prove, but at least with these measures we have the ability to punish people appropriately for what is really a very violent crime. And I think in our minds, the same as aggravated assault.
I don't think that's even arguable that it's a violent crime. So you want specific penalties for this, is that correct?
Well, we'd like to see it be basically put on the same level as other violent crimes, such as aggravated assault and that sort of thing. So by the passage of this bill, it would get treated more severely like you would see other serious violent crimes.
Wow. What's the prospect for passage? I know that's a tough question.
It's a tough question for me to answer. I don't know it, but we are very hopeful. We are very hopeful. There's no question about that.
All right, before I let you go, I want to just go back to recreational marijuana. There's an aspect of this where in some places, law enforcement folks in our state are not prosecuting it as a misdemeanor if you're caught with a couple of joints, let's say. But guess what? A summary offense, should we have reduced penalties, even if it's not legalized, reduced penalties if you get caught with a few, ounces in your possession?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a reasonable thing to do. And the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association actually supports the decriminalization of the possession of small amounts of marijuana. And what that would mean is that if somebody is caught with a small amount of marijuana, they might receive a civil fine, but there would be no criminal fine, no probationary period or any other criminal sanction attached to it. And I think that's a fair compromise.
Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in and providing an update on some very important measures here. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.